All right. Hi, everybody. Did you watch episode 6? Oh my goodness, this episode. It is fabulous. And I have so much to say. So much to say. So we're just going to dive in because there's a lot. Um, so, as always, there's going to be massive, massive, massive spoilers for episode 6, Contrabando. So don't finish watching this video until you've seen the episode. Okay? You've been warned. All right. So we start out with Daryl stopping. We see him drinking from the. Oh, wait. Hippo canteen. So kind of another Beth reference there between the hippo that we talked about from last episode and the water. And then we see him gassing up his bike. So we see a gas can here. Then, of course, he hears a car coming and goes into defensive mode, but it is path. Now, what I will see is it did really focus on her boots. It felt like they were really intentional about that. And we all know Beth's boots. Um, Not to mention, she just kind of looks like a sheriff. She's got the trench coat and she's got the band of bullets over her shoulder, and she just looks sort of like a Western, figure. So it works. Let's put it that way. What the hell are you doing here? She thought he might need a tour guide in Barcelona. This is where he drinks from the canteen again, and she says, "I didn't figure you for a hippomyopy guy." Now, obviously, this sounds a little bit like hippopotamus, but I wanted to know what it meant, and it's actually really interesting. This is the writers trying to tell us something, and it's really funny because it's something that we've talked about before. I looked it up, and it's definitely a play on words. So it says that the word is most likely a misspelling of the Spanish word for hippopotamus, so that makes sense. But hippomyopia, when you take it apart, it actually means nearsighted or myopic, meaning you're not seeing things very well or very clearly. And we've talked about this a bunch of times with Daryl, right? That because he is still kind of in the throes of his trauma and hasn't let his dead go, as it said at the very beginning of the first episode, he's not seeing things clearly. And Carol actually is now because she has let that stuff go. So this is really interesting to see them throw this little play on words in here to give us a theme. And we are 100% right, it looks like, about that theme. So this kind of made me smile. And then he just says, whatever, let's go. And okay, so there's kind of two different ways that we can look at this. One is that he's very much in denial about the fact that he's not seeing things clearly. But if we take the meaning to be more of the actual hippopotamus, that's a symbol for Beth. So I also feel like this is a way of saying, oh, I didn't, think you would be someone who would like her, or that, I didn't expect like a romance between you and her. And he goes, whatever. So this was just fun. It was really fun wordplay. All right, so they get to Barcelona and this really kind of famous carnival, which we've seen the carnival a lot, right? We saw it most famously around Rick and Michonne in season 712. And that was a foreshadow of Rick's disappearance into the CRM. We've seen it other places too, plenty of places, but this is a common theme. Um, and so she shows him where the convoy will be going. She tells him that she wants to go look for her friend, Neria. There was a refugee community, but she fell in love with a man there and stayed behind. And she says that she left because she was looking for somebody. So we're hinting at the story here that we're going to get later. We do have these two walkers in the it's on the Ferris wheel, right? In one of the little cars. I'm pretty sure this is a male and a female walker. So this is an example of the male female side by side walker thing. And these two actually died on the carnival ride, which is interesting, right? Especially given the carnival symbolism we've had before. We could probably dive a lot deeper into that, but we're going to keep going for now. So we see these home videos that Antonio made of Maria and Roberto when Roberto was a kid, which, by the way, young Roberto is so stinking cute. Teaching him to ride a bike. We did see the bicycle symbol here, and we saw it in a really big way too in the flashback, which we'll get to later. Um, he tells Carol they lived in Barcelona for 4 years before the breakout, and he wanted to make films. Notice he's petting his cat here. Um, he spent his communion money on a Super 8 like that. That's adorable. Um, my mother cried. My father hit me with a belt. And he says Maria was the only one who really understood him and that, him wanting to make films was not a pipe dream. So again, I'm going to say it again. There are definitely parallels between Antonio and Daryl. Um, the fact that his father hit him with the belt, like that really jumped out at me, and that nobody really understood him until Maria did. And then, of course, we're going to see in this episode how he loses Maria, much like Daryl lost Beth. So I'm seeing the parallels there. And even the fact that he's holding the cat as though the cat is a symbol that's being, um, they're using this as the cat as a symbol of him, and we've seen them use the cat as a symbol of Daryl too. Um, so Donna Marga comes in to check on him. She says, "How did he do overnight?" They said he was fine, he was doing better. And we obviously get another bit of tension here because Fede starts watching the TV that has Maria on it, and Roberto, or I mean, sorry, Antonio, we all screw up both the names, turns it off, right? So we have some tension there. Um, he asks how Roberto is doing. They tell him that he's doing better, and he hasn't spoken yet. He specifically asks if Roberto has said anything, and they say no. But they're just waiting for the treatment to take its course, and he is doing better. He does ask about Daryl, and Carol just deflects, "Oh, that's just Daryl. He's a hard worker." And then, um, oh, I'm blanking on his name. This guy comes to tell him that Sergio wants to talk to him at the gates. Um, so Fede heads down to the gates, and Sergio has found the three men that disappeared from El Alcathar's caravan, right? That Daryl killed. And he says it's they're here, one, two, three. And by the way, I went down to the boat. It doesn't look like anyone's been there for days. So he says it's clear the American lady is lying. Then we see the cat eating again. Um, I didn't really pick up on this until Carol actually says it, which she does right here during the shower scene, which I thought the shower scene was really funny and really charming because they both just get so embarrassed. Carol kind of freaks out. Um, she says your cat's hungry, and that's like the first time it really jumped out at me. Like we'd seen the cat eating several times, but when she says that, I was like, oh, they're trying to point us to something there. We need to notice that. But of course, she tries to deflect and say she's looking for a tool, and just she didn't even really put an emphasis on the tool, but it was like they chose screwdriver for a reason because that has a connotation to it. I'm looking for a screw driver. Like this was so funny. I just had to laugh. Um, and then he's like, "You can take a shower." I meant after I finish. And then he's, "Oh shit," Like, it was just funny. So then we're talking to Valentina again. The fact that this says arc, W.D. Way suggested that this might be telling us that they're three-tenths of the way through a particular arc, which is interesting. Um, this whole conversation, you will always know where you are. It just felt like it reminded me a little bit of this would have been back in season 6 when Carl is holding baby Judith and pointing out the North Star and telling her she can always use that star to guide her back home. This felt similar, just in its theme of figuring out where you are and knowing how to get home, right? Um, she asks about Carol and Antonio, and again, I actually really love their Carol and Valentina's friendship. I think they're funny, and I think Valentina is really funny. Um, so she gives her the Spanish phrase book. And then we have some themes coming out of the phrases for sure. One poison cures another, and she says, she goes, "This Spanish self-help?" And she says it just means that sometimes you need something risky or dangerous. She mentions alcohol and sex and love. So yeah, interesting things to mention, right? So then we get the scene, and even in this scene, I wasn't really putting everything together from this episode. She says that somebody's having a baby, and she's the town doctor, basically. And he says, "Well, what would we do without you?" And then she's going to go check on Roberto, and he stops her. And he says, "No, he went out looking for trouble. He had to learn." And she just kind of takes it in stride. She's not really disturbed by that at all. But then she says something interesting here. "You used to be the same. I remember how crazy you acted for some girl. You never told me who." So she actually doesn't know that he was in love with Maria. She knew that he had a crush on somebody, but she doesn't know who it was. So that's kind of interesting that other people don't know. Clearly, Antonio knows, but um, I don't think anybody else in the town really does. And he just kind of, oh, that was a long time ago. And, then she becomes all motherly and wants him to find a nice woman to settle down with and all of that. Now, I will say that even though Fede is becoming more villainous by the moment, I did think this moment with his mother was really sweet. Unfortunately, see, you're handsome, you're capable, go find a nice girl. And he just says he'll send somebody else to check on Roberto. Then we finally have this confirmation. He pulls out a picture and it is Maria. So, I mean, at this point, it was pretty obvious, that he was in love with Maria, especially given the way he was watching the TV. But this is just confirmation of it. He still has a picture of her. Okay, so then we get this dragon story. Holy cow, guys. Okay. Um, little Roberto is asking, are there more dragons here? And you can hear Antonio behind the camera saying, no, dragons only exist outside the city. And then he decides to tell him the story of St. George and the dragon, which is a real legend. Once upon a time, a fierce dragon terrorized a town. And we get the voiceover of this as Daryl and Path are arriving at this community. And I even think this right here is a dragon, or it's a statue painted like a dragon, right? So the dragon was so hungry that in order to keep him outside the walls, they decided to give him an animal to eat every day. And when they ran out of animals to give him, well, the town had no choice but to send someone chosen by the draw. So clearly they are paralleling this with La Ofrenda. They're doing a lottery basically to choose who's going to be the sacrifice. And it turned out to be the princess. The dragon arrived, breathing fire. The princess was sure her time had come, until St. George arrived. With his sword, he killed the dragon, and of its blood, a single rose emerged. So, I mean, obviously, we want to compare this back to Beth, and I don't think that there's just no getting around it, you guys. I mean, in 516, Father Gabriel talked about sacrificing one of their own, and we don't know exactly what this means because we don't have the missing 17 days. We don't know how it played out or exactly what he's referring to there. But the point is, they talked about a sacrifice that didn't make any sense at the time. Like, based on what we saw on screen, what Father Gabriel said makes absolutely no sense. The only reason it makes sense to us is because we pay attention and we know that there's missing footage there, right? But now we're talking about young women who are being sacrificed and a lottery. And we've not seen that with any other particular storyline. Maybe a little bit with Rick, if you talk about it symbolically. I'll get to that in a minute. But then we have this Rose. Remember that the little girl in the last episode was named Rosa, I believe, which means pink. And now we have this rose, right? From it emerged a rose. So what I did is I decided to look up this legend. Hold on. Okay. In a city called Selene, uh, it is terrorized by a venomous, fearsome dragon living in a nearby lake. To prevent the dragon from poisoning the city, the people offered a daily sacrifice of 2 sheep. When the sheep run out, a lottery system is used to select human sacrifices. I think it's interesting that the dragon was trying to poison the city. That's probably specifically why they did this poison thing with Fede in this episode, to reference that. One day, the lot falls on the king's own daughter, which is very it works out for Justina. Obviously Fede is not the king, but he's sort of the king of the town. He runs the town, and it falls to his niece. Though the king pleads for her life, the people refuse to accept any substitutes. As the princess is being led to the dragon, St. George, a knight and Roman soldier, rides by and asks why she is weeping. So if you hadn't figured it out, clearly Daryl is the knight in this case, right? He comes and sees that this girl is being taken and asks what's wrong. He confronts the dragon, pierces it with his spear, and knocks it to the ground. He instructs the princess to put her girdle around the dragon's neck, and the now docile creature follows her back to the city like a tamed animal. St. George there offers to slay the dragon permanently if the town's people convert to Christianity and are baptized. The people agree. George kills the dragon with his sword, and 15,000 men, along with countless women and children, are baptized. Now, it goes into the Crusades a little bit. The real St. George was a soldier of Greek origin in the Roman army who was martyred for his Christian faith in Palestine during the persecution of Emperor Diocletian. The story of the dragon was added to his legend centuries after his death. The dragon motif was not attached to the St. George legend until the 11th century and was popularized in Europe by returning crusaders. The story served as a powerful allegory for the triumph of good over evil, Christianity over paganism, and the values of chivalry and faith. The legend draws from pre-Christian dragon myths, including the Greek story of Perseus rescuing Andromeda from a sea monster near Lydda, which is also the traditional site of George's martyrdom. So this is telling us a lot about this dragon motif, right? This episode tells us a lot about not necessarily like what actually happened during the missing 17 days, but what the character arcs have always been that have been a little bit murky. So, in terms of the dragon thing, it is something to be slain that is holding a princess captive. Um, I mean, remember recently Norman was posting some, uh, what do you call them, stars, cosmology kind of stuff, and the dragon was one of them, right? Um, So he was hinting at this, that this story was coming up. So we know exactly why he posted that now. But remember that we have dragons other places. We have the one that really jumps out at me is the one that was in Sam's bedroom in 608, right? We had such a huge hint to this, and this is something that has been going on since season 5. Okay, we can see it more clearly now. There was the picture that Sam drew that looked exactly like the white cabin from the missing 17 days, right? So it's like showing us, like a visual of what went on there that we were missing. And right next to it was something that for a long time I thought was a dinosaur. It was kind of standing up like a T-Rex, but it was probably a dragon. And that is to show that, I mean, in this case, the dragon would be El Alcazar. I don't know why I have such a hard time saying that, because it is the larger evil organization that is holding these girls captive, right? They're not allowed to leave. And we get a little bit more about that in a minute when we get to the community that Daryl and Path go to. But what that picture then in Sam's room symbolizes is that, I mean, obviously the missing 17 days picture is about Beth. It has to be, and there's a dragon who's now holding her hostage. That tells us a lot that we've been right about this all along. That, whatever happened, however they lost her, and we do still think that Daryl thinks she's dead, that she turned. Again, we'll go into more ways that that is signified in this episode. But that's not what actually happened. Actually, there's a dragon, an organization that is holding her captive. And to me, this pretty much solidifies that as absolute truth because we're being given this story about the dragon to tell us how they're using the dragon symbolism, right? So this is a big deal. Um, Here's the other thing I just wanted to touch on briefly. I said before that they kind of did it with Rick. The imagery of St. George on a white horse slaying the dragon became a popular artistic subject in the late Middle Ages and Renaissance. The legend has influenced countless works of art, literature, and culture and is often used to symbolize bravery, chivalry, and the defense of the vulnerable. St. George is the patron saint of numerous places, most famously England, where his cross is featured on the national flag. Hence, maybe why they did the English thing in this season, even though they didn't particularly have to do that. Don't get me wrong, I loved the first episode. I thought it was fantastic, but they really could have skipped over that, had them find a boat, Daryl and Carol find a boat, get on the ocean, and just end up in Spain. They didn't need to do the whole English thing, but I wonder if this is wise to pay tribute to the legend. But what I wanted to say about Rick is that while we've never seen Daryl in particular up on a white horse, we did see Rick on one right before he disappeared into said civilization. And the other thing is that up here it says that first, before he kills the dragon, um, he tells the princess to put her girdle on it and it becomes docile. That's interesting because of the ones who live and what happened with the CRM there. It seems like the CRM, to quote Galadriel Jones, was like a big nothing burger, right? After all of that buildup, it just felt like Michonne and Rick tamed it and they figured it out and now everybody's good, And so that was a little bit confusing to us. We were going, oh, well, either things are going to go bad again, or maybe it's just one faction they're friends of, and there will be another faction, say in Europe, that will be a problem, or there's going to be a different organization, right? But we don't think we've all been doing research, more and more, and we don't think it's going to be a different organization. We still think it'll be the CRM overall. Could we be wrong? Sure. And it doesn't really matter so long as there is an organization. But if you think about this, he made the dragon docile before he killed it. He did go on to kill it to save people, but first he made it docile. So, I mean, I think Rick and Daryl are both our white knights, right? They're both St. George, protecting people and doing this sort of thing. So that's why we saw Rick on the white horse, and that is why they tamed the CRM, but it's probably not going to stay tamed. Okay. St. George still killed the dragon, but he tamed it first, and then circumstances later on led to him killing it. So really interesting, really good stuff. Oh man, I loved this stuff. I loved what it's telling us, what it's communicating to us about what happened back then, what is happening now, and to be able to finally see this template. Um, for so many years, I would look at the dragon, and I often called it a dinosaur. And then there's the strange dinosaur slash unicorn thing that's on uh, Eastman's daughter's. I mean, there's just all this kind of weirdo stuff, and it was hard to know what it was because it wasn't an in-your-face symbol, and we kind of thought, is this even a symbol? Are we imagining this? Does it mean anything? Now we know for sure it does. They've finally given us the template for the symbol. So, booyah. And then, of course, we have the rose. And I'm just going to go ahead and assume that the rose is Beth. So, from the bloodshed, from all of this happening, emerges the rose, which is Beth, but it also could just be love in general. You know what I mean? And something beautiful growing out of it, but you have to slay the dragon first, right? So they get there. It doesn't seem like anybody is there. He says it was a waste of time. It was too long ago. We need to find my friends. Then, of course, the walkers emerge, and Daryl says, I hope these ain't your friends. I did take this previous shot here because it very specifically, it has Path look over and then it shows the bike. It's like the camera focuses on the bike with the walkers coming toward it. I actually think this is yet another way to, we've said before several times that the bike is a symbol of Beth. And I don't know, there's walkers uh, surrounding it, right? But I've also, okay, maybe I'll wait to get to this until we get the other discussion. But I have another, I have some more insight into the bicycle symbolism. So we'll come back to that. They start fighting the walkers, and then finally the doors open and they are ushered inside, but at gunpoint. And then this woman walks up, and of course, the first thing that catches my eye about her is she's blonde, but she is actually Pat's friend. They recognize each other. Her name is Leah, something like that. And they are old friends. And then he he says to this woman, "Nice crossbow." And this woman was interesting. I was trying to figure out who she represents. She actually is in it quite a bit, but as a side character. But she does help with the um, ambush of the uh, caravan quite a bit. But she's got a crossbow, and that makes me think that she's kind of a Beth parallel. Um, and she and Daryl, they do like have eye contact several times. He tells her nice crossbow. So I don't know if she's supposed to be a minor parallel to Beth or something else. Maybe a mirror of him in some ways. But anyway, it was kind of funny. Nice crossbow, you think? All right. So again, my first instinct was that this blonde woman is a parallel of Beth, and in many ways, I think she is. I mean, not just the blonde hair, but she's leading this group and she's helping people and saving people from this organization. All of those feel very Beth coded. It also feels a lot like the French girl from season one of Daryl Dixon, who had, she was kind of a Wendy and the Lost Boys sort of situation where she had all the kids. In that case, they were kids, but she was taking in foundlings and orphans, and saving them. Here, this woman is kind of doing the same thing, only that they're not children, they're young women who are on the run from El Alcazar, right? So it's just kind of similar in the way that it's formatted. Um, she says that they welcome anyone who's on the run to save them. And Daryl says, that's why we're here. We are trying to help somebody. And she says, we don't have resources for an attack. We're just a refugee camp. And he kind of pushes back against that and says, I don't know about that. You guys know how to defend yourselves. I think you're stronger than you think you are. But she says, she doesn't want to risk everything. And there's someone else that Path knows. It's this guy. So this is the guy who married her friend. So Nerea is the one she said she came to Barcelona with, and then she stayed behind because she fell in love. This is the guy she fell in love with. But unfortunately, her friend died 2 years ago. Um, Khalid, that's his name. I couldn't remember his name. So, unfortunately, she does not get to see her friend again. And then he asks about Elena, and she says, I never got to her. Then they introduce him to Daryl. Everywhere is far away now, huh? And he says, tell me about it. They just have some really fun dialogue in here. Okay, so we'll go back to that. Then we get Carol and Antonio looking at the phrase book. Again, this was just kind of a fun conversation. He's teaching her phrases, but they don't translate directly. They're more like figures of speech. Um, And this is kind of interesting because, in a way, like they're basically talking about symbolism here, right? It translates literally to I don't have hairs on my tongue, but it means you speak your mind. And it's funny that the powers that be or that the writers put this in almost as a way of saying pay attention to the symbolism because not everything is literal, right? Literally, it just seems like Daryl and Carol are trying to get home from Spain, but what's actually going on is a lot deeper than that. There are symbolic meanings, which are truer in a lot of ways than the literal meaning, right? And here's another one. Estas como una regadera. I'm probably not saying that well. Um, I am a watering can. Well, there's a water reference for you. And he says, it means that you are out of your mind. Now, this is, again, this feels very symbolic to me. I'm not exactly sure what they're saying, but you are out of your mind. And then she says regadera again, which is the watering can. So there's an emphasis on the water, but it's also being entangled with the idea of madness, right? Of not being in your right mind, which could literally mean madness. But I mean, I think it goes back to what we've said about Daryl not seeing things correctly or things being hazy, not perceiving them right. So you're kind of out of your mind. It also could mean doing crazy things like going to save someone, I mean, the people. Um, Leia in that town kept telling Daryl and Paz, you shouldn't do this. It's suicide. You're going to be outnumbered. You know what I mean? So I think all of this is working together, but they are entangling that with the water symbol, which is interesting. We get some more flirtation here between Carol and Antonio as he tells her to roll her R's. And then she mentions a river. This is another water symbol. Okay. Rio is river. But then they find out that Roberto has gotten sick again. He has a fever. And my first instinct, if I saw something like that, would be like, well, he was doing better, but infections can start anytime. But they're going out of their way to tell us that something's off here. He says he was better. I don't understand. Carol says we need medicine. He doesn't think Fede will give it to them, and she says, well, we're going to have to make him. Then we see the cat still eating. This is a cat that keeps eating everybody's food, or I think it's specifically the food that's been left out for Roberto, but he's too sick. He's not eating it, so the kitty keeps getting into it. Um, uh, Antonia was right. Fede does not want to give him any medicine. And she's saying you can't spare any. And really, it's ridiculous. A little bit of aspirin. I mean, Roberto's part of the town. That's exactly who the medicine is for. So what Fede is saying doesn't add up. But obviously, they know that this is more of um, a grudge that he's holding. So Carol kind of threatens to tell everyone what he's doing. He doesn't like that. And then he says, perhaps it's time for you to leave. Yes, I intend to. And Antonio defends her and says, until then, she's my guest. And he says, okay, well, tell her not to, basically be putting her nose where it doesn't belong. And that's it for that scene. Okay. This was maybe my favorite thing in the entire episode. This woman is the Spanish version of Beth. I mean, she couldn't be any more Beth if she tried, right? She is singing, and uh, they have Path say that she's got a very beautiful voice. They go out of their way to say that. She's playing the guitar, which is the last thing we saw Beth do, technically, in 509, in Tyrese's death hallucination. She's even wearing Andrea's beanie. I think it's a different color than the one Beth wore, but it's the same style. She's even wearing the beanie, you guys. This is so clearly a Beth thing. And Daryl is staring at her. I freaking loved this scene. That's where she says she has a pretty voice. I was curious about the name, so I looked it up, just wondering what it meant. Sandra is a derivative of Alexandra, and it means defender of mankind or protector of men. So I kind of can't help but think they chose that on purpose. Then we learn a little bit about this Sandra. They say that she was put in El Alcazar, but she was never matched, which is interesting. But they just turned her into a slave, and it really sounds like manual labor kind of slave. But they beat her and kept her as a slave, and it was a miracle that she got away. So there's so many possibilities here. Um, this very well could translate over to what happens with Beth, and she's going to get away, which is probably what the Flash in season 5 of her running was all about, right? Um, and I didn't even talk about that before. They were talking about not being able to leave, right? It's not like El Alcazar, even though that they didn't match her with anyone, and we don't even really know exactly what that means. We're kind of starting to get an idea based on the trailer for the final episode next week, but um, they're we do know that they're meant to go into the organization and marry or be matched up with someone. And at one point, I think it's in their later conversation we haven't gotten to yet, Path says something about repopulation bullshit or something. But she was never actually matched with anyone. So that really could translate to Beth. And then it's a miracle she got away. This could be talking about her getting away from the organization, which I think it will be that. But also, it's kind of a miracle that she lived, right? So I think it's both. They beat her. I mean, they literally beat her at Grady. So this could also be a callback to Grady, that she was taken there, she was beaten. It was a miracle that she actually got away, even though Daryl doesn't think she got away. He thinks she was killed. Anyway, just so many parallels here, right? And then she says her first 3 months here, she didn't utter a word because she was too traumatized. I don't know if that will be the case with Beth, maybe. Um, but I don't know. It brings me back to the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil kind of thing. And I mean, also, she said 3 months, which could equate to the 3 weeks of Beth being in a coma. Not sure, just spitballing there. Anyway, then Daryl changes the subject and basically says, when's the next friendo in whatever town? And he says, very soon, 2 days, and they want to catch up to the caravan before that happens. But this is where she's saying, nope, not possible. And he says, well, we're trying to save a girl. Isn't that what you do? And she says, yeah, but I can't risk everything for one girl. If they find out we're here and what we're doing, then they could take us down, basically. But then Pass says, well, it's not just one girl. Guillermo is with them, next in line to the crown. And he says, we get to save our girl. You get to kill the next king of Spain. And that obviously gets her attention and she starts thinking about it. Okay, obviously, these two shots, I did not get a good shot of this, but Path, I think it's Path gives Daryl some bullets, and I'm pretty sure there's 4 of them. It focused on that and her just putting the bullets down and then he picks them up. And it's very quick. So it looks like 3 at one point, but I think it's 4. And this just takes me back to last episode when little Rosa, right, was counting the bullets. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we're seeing, for some reason that has nothing to do with the plot in this episode, we're seeing someone give Daryl 4 bullets and he picks them up. So this is a theme that's going on, and I'm not sure where they're going with it. I mean, I would assume any bullets he got here were probably used during the ambush. So it might not be these bullets in particular that's important, but just the 4 bullets or the 4 shots. They're trying to draw our attention to that. So they show him this map and where they have to cross, and they say, so we have this river theme going on here again. In this case, it is, I actually like that they call them the insatiables. That's cool. They say it's become a belt that protects the community. So they just herded all of the walkers into this place you can see with the light. And it's basically a moat of walkers, which we did actually see in France around one of the castles in season 1, I think. So it's something we've seen before, but still, we've got the water parallel going on there and a moat full of walkers, which, obviously not the best thing. And this is where they need to cross. And he says that's where we're going to hit them. But she says the convoy soldiers and checkpoint guards will be fighting together. So again, they're going to be outnumbered. And he says then we won't hit them all at once. So they're going to do a guerrilla warfare sort of thing. All right, we did get a little bit more of the flashback. And I will say, I don't know how much of this I want to go into. So a lot of people were noticing that they put out a clip, a short, like 3 minute clip of Daryl and Carol having a conversation from episode 7. And it's interesting that they put that out. Actually, it was like yesterday, before we saw episode 6. But I think they're trying to get us to bring the themes and especially the arc around Daryl. They want us to bring that together, and that's why they released that clip. So I'm just going to give you a brief rundown of it. It's really not that big of spoiler. It's like I said, it's like a 3 minute conversation, and it's just the theme that they're going for that's important. In it, like you can go watch it on YouTube if you want, but Daryl is basically telling Carol that he has always had an instinct to run. And even when he doesn't really have to, he never likes to settle down. It's just he's always kept running. So when he keeps saying the thing about running and fighting and that's no way to live, it's like he's getting this wisdom about himself that this is something he's always done. He's always had this instinct to run. And maybe he doesn't want that anymore. He's finally getting to a point where he can actually look back on his life and draw some conclusions about himself and do so in a way that is, kind of neutral and that he can step back and look at it from a place of wisdom, right? And I think this is what they're trying to show with these flashbacks, which because of this, we still don't see that much of it. We don't get the whole scene by any means, but I don't know if we will. I hope we do. I hope we get more, but it would even, given that, what he says in the 7th episode to Carol, this may be enough for what they're going for. And it is simply that it was really conditioned into him to run in order to survive because he was running from his abusive father, right? So we just kind of see more of that. We see him running, um, get out of here. I'm again assuming this is Merle. I think it has to be Merle, the older boy that we see. So he says, get out of here. And then Daryl says, you got to come too. Merle, assuming that's him, says, go run. And then Daryl says, I'm scared. Um, and then Merle says, Daryl, haul ass. And now go, don't look back. Don't you ever look back. Then we have the scene where we actually see them inside the trailer. Here are the toys we originally saw. And we see him, and then we kind of hear the voiceover. So we don't actually see his mouth moving at this point, but he says, don't you worry about me. I can take it. All right. And notice that they both have black eyes. Already, Daryl's nose is bleeding. So they've already been hit today, right? And Daryl says, you got to come too. Merle says, I'll be okay. Now go on, go. And then that's basically it. Daryl wakes up. So all I'm saying is that they're showing the origin, what you might call a character wound, that created a limiting belief in Daryl and leads to this behavior, which is the only way to be safe is to run. And that's why he's always run. So I really think that's what they're getting at. And they might not give us very much more of this flashback. I hope they do. Like, I want to see more of it. But I really think that is the whole message right there, is him figuring out why he's always felt like running. And we can talk about that clip more next week when we actually see it, but there's a lot about being afraid in it. Beth and Daryl had a lot, actually quite a few lines about being afraid. You don't have to treat me like crap because or just because you're afraid. And then he gets really mad when she says that and says, I ain't afraid of nothing. But really, she's hitting a nerve there, right? She's hit on something um, that he doesn't want to admit even to himself, that he runs, and it is a fearful thing to run like that rather than confront. And this is going to tie into this conversation we're coming up on with Path here. But, Beth could see through his defenses in a way nobody else could. And the other thing I was thinking about is that at first she didn't understand them, like back in season 3. Remember that when he left with Merle, she didn't like Merle very much. And she told Carol, he seems like a jerk. But she didn't understand why Daryl would go with him. And it's because she didn't come from an abusive background. And she didn't understand that very often people who are abused actually cling on to their abuser. So Daryl and Merle actually didn't have the most healthy relationship either. There was a toxicity in their relationship as well. But Daryl was very loyal to Merle because Merle did protect him sometimes. And that's very common for this sort of thing to happen in abusive relationships. So she didn't understand that at first. But I think she did come to understand it when they were talking in Still. She said, you miss him, don't you? And she understood by then that Daryl had some sort of affection and loyalty for his brother, even if she didn't like him very much. So you can kind of see the evolution of that. Um, so it's just really, really interesting to see this. And anyway, it seemed like I had something else to say there, and I've kind of lost my train of thought. But I was just thinking about this a lot, about Merle and Daryl and what we saw back then. Oh, I know what it was. Um, he's always running, right? And we do see this throughout the entire season or the entire series, not the entire season. He's always running, right? The only time he didn't run, the only time it was him who suggested they not move on and settle down was with Beth. The only time. So that's really significant too. All right, so he notices that Path is awake, bad dreams, rainbows and puppies. This was interesting. It took me a minute. Remember that in Consumed, he and Carol saw that picture, and it was a dog with a rainbow under it, it wasn't an actual rainbow, but kind of looked like one. And he said the thing about how it looked like the dog sat in paint and wiped its ass all over, but it was a dog and a representation of a rainbow. So this is a callback to Consumed, which is when they were looking for Beth. And then he says in Solaz, I saw you with that lady. She says, yeah, Elena, and she's a princess now. And then she tells her whole story, which in many ways obviously mirrors Daryl and Beth. We were teenagers when we met in school. I mean, Daryl and Beth weren't teenagers, but they were very young, right? It was a long time ago. I never dreamed she'd notice me. Then she did, and it was magic. And remember, we've had Norman confirm that Daryl had feelings for Beth, but when she said, "Oh," he thought he was mistaken about her feelings for him. So this does line up. Those first few months after that's the turn, right? When the world was falling apart, she and we were so happy. And he says, and then they took her. The first ofrenda. So obviously, I mean, I don't know that it was months and months that they were on the road together, but we've kind of determined that it was at least weeks, right? And they were pretty happy together. After the fight in Still, they became very comfortable with each other. But it's interesting that I just think it's really interesting that she calls it the first ofrenda. And that is literally true. It was like the first time El Alcazar actually did the ofrenda. So Elena was taken in the first ofrenda, and that's like literally true. But, as it applies to Beth, it was the first one a long time ago. I just thought it was interesting that they put that in there. She says it was supposed to be only once, but it turned into something that became regular. There's the to repopulate or some bullshit. And he says you went to get her back, and she went with her friend who, the one who married Khalid and then apparently passed away about 2 years ago, in the present. But that friend of hers was the one who was helping her search for Elena. That is a really obvious parallel to Death and to Daryl and Carol searching for Beth, right? Um, they chased the convoy from town to town, always too late. It felt like if I stopped, it would become real. Not seeing her again, but if I didn't give up, you wouldn't have to accept it. So, okay. On the one hand, this actually is a parallel to Daryl's running, the fact that she's running from town to town looking for Elena. And so it's an analogy for saying part of the reason he runs is that if he stops, he's going to have to face his past. He's going to have to face all the things that he's running from that are not comfortable to face, all the past trauma, right? And we know he hasn't let go of his dad. So this is, of course, it's Beth, but it's also Merle, and it's also uh, Glenn, and it's also now Isabel, and maybe even Leah to a certain extent, even though she's not mentioned as much, and I don't think he cares as much about her as the others. I mean, he still did have to shoot someone in the head that he had a relationship with. That's not exactly an everyday thing that you go through. So there's that aspect of it, but um, also it's about whether accepting that he's never going to see Beth again, or he's never going to see any of those people again that he's lost, and that's hard to accept. So he keeps running, and then we've got, and I get it from Daryl, which is a Beth line. And she says she actually made it there, and tried to break in, but they caught her, left me on the road for dead to be eaten by the walkers, basically. Once again, Daryl actually made it to Grady, right? And tried to get her, but it's not that he was left for dead, but we do think that we have the whole Walker horde in the missing 17 days that they had to run from, right? But I lived could also be a parallel for Beth, right? Because Beth actually was the one who was left and the walkers were around her. I mean, she was probably left in a car. And then this whole, but I lived, right? Now, this is the part that's really interesting to me, and everybody pay attention to this. I convinced myself it was better to forget, that forgetting wasn't the same as giving up. This is an explanation for why he's never said her name. It was easier to forget and just pretend like he hadn't given up, because forgetting was easier and it wasn't the same. That he would have a lot of shame about giving up. So it's just a defense mechanism. He has to forget instead. And not that he's actually forgotten her, obviously, but this is why he doesn't say her name. This is why, because it's too painful. And if it's like if he said her name, it would have to be him admitting that he'd given up on her. And guys, we don't know exactly what happened, but Daryl did give up on looking for Beth. This is part of the problem, okay? This is part of what he is so messed up about. And again, not to throw any shade at Daryl, I think Rick and some of the others kind of forced him to, but and this is so interesting because it was actually foreshadowed before season 5. So, um, in season 4, when they were going to the veterinary college, him and Michonne are talking, and he's saying he's basically giving her crap about running off to look for the governor, and she gets kind of offended by that and says, "I'm not running off. I need to find him." And she hasn't given up. And he says, "Well, if there was any trail, I'd be right there with you, but there's no trail." And so he basically talks her into giving up. And I mean, honestly, in all reality, it wasn't a bad decision. Like, what's the point of going out and looking for someone you're never going to find? So it's not that their decision was bad, but it's the way that they basically felt guilty about it, because then the governor came back and bulldozed the prison and people died and they lost their home. And Daryl even says that to Beth during the argument in Still, that if he had kept looking for the governor, then he wouldn't have been able to come back and he wouldn't have been able to kill Herschel, right? And he had a lot of guilt over that. And that was also a foreshadow that in some way he was going to give up looking for Beth. And again, it was probably because everybody kind of talked him into it. And also he thought that she had turned into a walker. And there's a lot of reasons. It wasn't that he was necessarily wrong or that he did anything wrong, but there's this sense that he gave up on her. And this is what Path is talking about. Now, again, I think it is a little bit different because Daryl thinks Beth is a walker, and Path knew very well that Elena was not, that she was just inside El Alcazar. But this is telling us how he feels about what happened, right? And honestly, this is maybe why I always say that Tyrese's funeral, he turns his back on Sasha before handing her the shovel. And I don't know what Sasha had to do with it necessarily. We still don't know that, but this could be a lot. What his grief is about is that he was forced to give up and he couldn't live with himself. And he kind of comes out of it a little bit, at least enough to resume life. But we all know he hasn't been the same, right, ever since then. So yeah, just I couldn't believe all of the stuff they gave us in this episode. So then he says, "What changed?" She showed up in Solaz out of the blue, like a dream. And I think it's cute that Daryl smiles. And again, this is a foreshadowing that somebody is going to show up out of the blue, like a dream. And everything with Roberto, how hard he was fighting. So she was actually um, inspired by Roberto, that he was fighting so hard, and that made her feel guilty because she felt like she had given up on Elena, right? "I knew I was wrong to ever stop." And you just see Daryl thinking about this. And she says, "Well, now you know my reason for being here. What's yours?" And he doesn't answer, but she says, "I think maybe you lost someone too, someone you can't get back." So on the surface, and I'm sure if asked, they would say it's about Isabel. And in fact, they kind of do say that in the episode insider at the end. I'll show you when we get there. But that's like their cover story. It's about Isabel because he feels bad. And he even kind of pushes it off. I've lost a lot of people. And it's like he's saying, oh no, he gets like self-conscious about it here, like he always does, right? And he's saying, it's not one person, it's a lot of people, because that's just easier to talk about. But you guys, there's the girl who was playing the guitar. That is a very, very clear indication that this is about Beth way more than it's about Isabel. I mean, I'm sure he does still have guilt about Isabel, like, sure, no contest, but that's not really what this is about, right? And then we have Carol and Antonio talking about the literal meaning of something versus the figurative meaning of something, right? And then Path says they don't all hurt the same. So again, sure, he hurts over Isabel, but there's someone he's hurting a lot deeper about than her. Um, Really, really telling conversation, right? So then we go back to Roberto, who is getting worse. He's wheezing. Carol's going to do her Carol thing and go sneak around and break in somewhere to get what he needs. But the poor kitty died. And when I was watching this, I was going, hey, who killed the kitty? That's not cool. She didn't seem all that shocked by it, but I think she's just kind of one track mind. She just wants to get Roberto his medicine. She's about to break in to Fede's office, but she sees these guys, Guillermo, he's the guy whose name I couldn't remember before, and Sergio. And Sergio is actually talking about Guillermo's wife is sick, and he says she's not really getting better. And so Sergio says, if you need extra medicine, come and see me. And I think the point here is that medicine is being handed out. So clearly, Fede is discriminating against Roberto, right? Because he's not rationing it for anybody else. Then they leave, so she gets into the office. It's locked, but she finds the key in a box, key symbol here, right? And then she finds the necklace and the medicine. And then Grandma, Dona Marga, I always forget her name, comes in and finds her. So Carol tries to tell her it's for Roberto. He's very sick. Justina loved him. Fede lied. He's been lying for years. She found out and he sent her away, but then she says, you don't know what I'm saying. Grandma doesn't really speak much English. So Carol tries again. She knows a few words. She says Fede lied, and Grandma says, no, my Fede is not a liar. And every time she mentions Justina, you see Grandma's face contort a little bit. She clearly misses her granddaughter and cares about her, so that's getting to her. But the interesting thing is that I was thinking because she wasn't that shocked about the cat that maybe Carol was already figuring it out, but I think she actually figures it out on the spot right here because she says, oh, like she just gets it. And she goes, Fede's poisoning him, the cat. So the cat kept eating Roberto's food, and the cat died because of that. So it's that, if we go back to what Antonio said, theoretically, it wouldn't be shocking that he could get an infection because that happens all the time, but they were trying to show us that something is wrong. And it's that Fede is actually poisoning Roberto, trying to kill him. And, I just kind of have to, oh, Fede, I was in your corner for a minute, bud, but you're really screwing it up now. And I think it has a lot to do with him losing Justina. He's kind of in this, well, if my niece, if I can't have her, then you can't have Roberto kind of thing. But Carol does manage to communicate things to Grandma here, and she helps and gives her the medicine. The next day, we see that the medicine is working, and Carol once again says we need to leave, at least to the lighthouse for right now. And then we have this, if he dies because of me. So once again, the same parallel, not only between Antonio and Daryl, but also we have Path thrown into the mix here. And one is more not more potent, I guess, but it's like a notch above because in Path's case, Elena didn't die, but she did lose her because she was taken into this organization. In Antonio's case, he feels like someone, Maria, died because of him. And with Daryl, it's both because he thinks she died because of him. That's how he's paralleled with Antonio, but she didn't really. He doesn't realize that, and that's how he's paralleled with Path. So the way they are entwining these arcs is really kind of amazing. So anyway, she says we have to go before Fede's on to us, get on the boat. He says once again that he can't. She says, whatever awful thing it is that Fede's holding over you, tell me what it is. And at this point, I was practically like picketing for Antonio to tell us what it is. Come on, Antonio, do it, tell her, we want to know. But he finally says he can show her. So they go and watch the movie that he made. The gist is that they were protesting with a group that was not great. And he says basically they were terrorists, and his wife didn't like it. She didn't like this group, but he believed it because his mother had been in it. And unfortunately, there's this explosion. We don't see what the explosion is, but there's a car behind her after the explosion. And I actually wonder if the car blew up, if it was like a car bomb. Um, and we see Roberto waking up as he's telling this story to Carol. She didn't want anything to do with it. He made her do it. He insisted. Then we have the explosion. And so this is where all of Antonio's guilt comes from. See, you see how this car is on fire behind her? I actually wonder if the car blew up. And she was standing right next to it. So again, this could be a callback to what happened with Beth. It was a bad group that they were part of, or, Grady, basically, that she was with. She didn't like it. She didn't want to be there. She tried to get away. And it's not that, in this case, it's not that Daryl insisted she stay or anything. That was mostly just in Antonio and Maria's case. But it's still a matter of something happened and she apparently died and he lost her and he feels like it's his fault. Um, so we finally learn what that is. And I knew as he was saying this, especially when he was saying, I was never able to tell my son the truth. I was like, oh, Roberto's going to be right behind him, isn't he? And sure enough, it was. But he feels like it's his fault. Poor Antonio. I feel for the guy. And Roberto did hear it, so he knows now. Um, we also learned, I kind of skipped over that quickly, that Fede knows about this. And it's a matter of clearly Fede was in love with Maria and was upset and angry that he didn't win her. And so when he found out this happened, he's holding it over Antonio's head, saying, do what I want or I will tell your son. And Antonio just couldn't deal with the guilt of it. So he never wanted Fede to do that. So again, there's a parallel there to Daryl's guilt, right? And not talking about things, not talking probably about his wife and her death, because it's just too painful, right? But now Roberto knows the truth is out. Just a lot of pain floating around these characters. It's like trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma, but that's kind of just how The Walking Dead rolls, right? So we get to the ambush here at the gates. We see Justina in the back in a cage. I mean, it's just the whole thing. I mean, it's despicable anyway, but they're actually keeping them in a cage. You couldn't even put them in a car. Like, why do you have to keep them in a cage? Anyway, don't be afraid. Again, I'm going to go back to Justina is a lot like Beth. She's just always calm and reassures people and has a very steady and kind presence. We see that the people at the gate are actually past friends from that community. I had to laugh here. I mean, you guys have probably noticed I laugh at things that most people don't find funny, but I just, it was just one of those things when you saw these people, it's like, oh, okay, so sucks to be these guys. They were taken prisoner, and actually all the people who are supposed to be them are, Daryl and everybody. And it's funny that they took their clothes too. They're all sitting here in their underwear. Anyway, so they start the ambush. We get a shot of some tires here. Um, Leia is helping. One thing I didn't notice the first time until I started going through and getting screenshots is that they take Guillermo and Elena, right, the next king and his wife, out of one car and put them into another one. And it doesn't really tell us why they did that other than maybe this car is more heavily armored or something. And so they take them out of one car and put them into the other. This is Elena being put in. And I just feel like that could be a parallel to Beth if she was, we always say that she got out of the car and they assume she staggered away. We don't really talk about, did she actually stagger away? Did she actually leave on foot, or did another car show up and take her? And especially if she was hurt, if she was already in her coma, Rick was in a coma for 3 weeks and all of that parallel, then she really probably didn't stagger away. Somebody came and got her out of the car and put her in another car and took her away. And if there were enough walkers that came through after that, then they would only see walker tracks. They probably wouldn't see tire tracks. So anyway, just kind of interesting thing to think about. Elena, she doesn't actually see Path at this part, but she does see Daryl and she recognizes him and realizes kind of what's going on. It's like, oh dear, shit's about to get real, right? Um, I'm still working over the symbolism here. He finally gets to Justina. They can't get in. This is just a ridiculously heavy duty lock, and he's unable to break it. But I mean, we have the lock and key symbols here. I mean, overall, the obvious parallel here is the fact that he actually gets to Justina and is unable to get her back. So that is a parallel to, getting to Beth at Grady, but he still loses her, right? Justina still disappears into the organization here. And even though he may not know what happened with Beth, so does she. So I'm thinking, I remember at Grady when they were going in to do the prisoner exchange, it kept showing people opening locked doors with keys. And it was the Grady people who were taking them in, right? And it kept showing them opening this door and opening that door. And then, Rick and Daryl going in with their prisoners and everything. So this is part of the same symbolism. In that case, they were getting into Grady, but it's like they didn't quite unlock the truth there that would have allowed them to truly get Beth back. They only saw her for a minute in the hallway and then they lost her. And here he sees Justina for a minute here on the road and then he loses her again. You see what I mean? So we see him working so hard, so desperately to get this lock undone, and it's just not happening. Um, Here, Leia opens the door. It took me a minute to figure out what this was about, but she finds this. I don't know what kind of weapon this is. Maybe somebody else does. It's like a rocket or a bazooka kind of thing, um, and that she realizes she's going to use. Elena does see Path, once she's in the car, but this is them saying it's not working. So here's Elena looking at Path. And what's interesting is her husband notices here, and I'm wondering how that's going to play out. He looks at her and then he looks at Elena, and it's like he realizes they're staring at each other. Um, and I don't know that he would have any way to know that, or even that he would suspect that they were lovers. I don't think even that would enter his mind. But he's thinking this is someone she knows, that maybe this is a friend of hers or something. And I wonder if Elena is going to be in trouble because of that. If this guy is abusive, which I'm going to go ahead and assume that he is, that she could be in a lot of trouble now because he noticed that. And that is not a good thing for him to have noticed that. Um, she tells Daryl the guard has the keys, which he does, but Daryl still can't seem to get the right key in there to work. The gate is opening. So she's saying we have to stop them. This is when Leia is going to kill Guillermo. And she says, we can't let him get away. But she says, Elena's in that car, you'll kill her. And she pushes her so that she misses. Um, okay, so let me go back to this actually blows kind of a hole in the wall, and some of the walkers start getting through. But I actually had this thought earlier when Path first got up into the truck with Leia, and we could see that they were about to start the ambush. It occurred to me that even though on a lot of levels, I think this woman, Leia, represents Beth, especially with the blonde hair, um, in a lot of ways, I had the thought that maybe she represents Tyrese because she is somebody who, while she wants to help and wants to protect and safeguard, she was not all that keen on the ambush. And remember, it was Tyrese who didn't want to go into Grady with guns blazing. He wanted to do it a different way. And Tyrese just wasn't a violent guy, and he didn't like the idea of, of any kind of violence, which obviously none of them do. It's not like he's alone in that. But remember, even early on in season 4 with Karen, he didn't like killing the walkers on the fence, and then he went out with the group, but he didn't like killing them out there either. You know what I mean? And anyway, I just think there could be a parallel there. Um, Now, again, we don't know anything about Tyrese, I don't know, doing anything like this, trying to shoot someone and missing. I mean, I don't know if that's a parallel or not. If it is, it would be during the missing 17 days. But what made me think of this is that she continues to go after Guillermo, gets shot in the arm, in the shoulder, really. But Tyrese was bitten on the arm, and then these walkers take her down. And it just felt like she sort of surrendered to them. She sort of gave up. And in a lot of ways, You could say that's what Tyrese did too. Certainly not on purpose. He didn't go out looking to get killed or he wasn't suicidal or anything. But at some point, he sort of surrendered to what was happening. And then, did I get this shot? The walker's like on top of her, biting her neck. This looks almost exactly like the walker that Morgan kills at the end of Coda. We've talked before about how, in that case, it almost looked like the walker's head was turned around, but it was either that or there was another walker on top of her, which is why we have, it looks like somebody's back, but she's facing this way because this is actually not her. Um, and I even feel like this could be a parallel to, like, we could see it in Glenn's death fake out, because in that case, it looked like Glenn was getting killed, but Nicholas was lying on top of him. So it's something about, at least where Beth is concerned, it almost strikes me as something that has to do with looking like they're being killed when they're actually not. But I don't think this woman Leia is alive. She actually does get killed. So, I mean, obviously, I haven't quite hit on the details of it yet. It doesn't work across the board, but I thought this was really interesting. And it's what made me think she might be a little bit of a Tyrese parallel too. Um, they start going, they're not able to get them out. I thought this was really sad and really sweet that he's just holding on to her hand and so desperate to help her, and he can't. And he's not saying, Justina, I'm sorry, this is Path saying that. And then she says, Daryl, don't let us go. Daryl, please no. And this is such a disaster, not only for Justina's part, but because if he is unable to help her, if he's unable to save her, this is going to be another trauma for Daryl. Even though he doesn't know her very well or particularly care about her, I mean, this is just another person that's begging him to save her. And if he can't, that's a problem, right? It's going to mess Daryl up even more. And she literally said, "Don't let us go," and that's part of the theme from the beginning, where you have to let your dead go. And she's saying, "Don't let us go. Don't give up. Don't let us go," which goes into the "don't give up" thing, right? And he feels like he's given up in the past. So really sad. I will say though that I guess I sort of expected him to rescue her here. But I don't know. I didn't really have any expectations going in one way or the other. But at the same time, if he had rescued her here, they would, they and we as the viewers would not have gotten a look at what is going on the inside of El Alcazar. And we need to get that look. So it kind of makes sense that he didn't rescue her here. He's got to go on the inside and see what's actually going on. And I'm very interested to know what's going on because I think it will give us even more insight into Beth. And then, of course, it's what I said, that he had to find her briefly but lose her again for the sake of the parallel sequence, right? So then we go back to Carol. They are sneaking Roberto out. Um, he's not happy with Antonio, so they're not really talking, but she says he'll talk to you eventually. And this is a little bit of insight into Carol here. The best thing telling a lie is when you get to start telling the truth, it really does set you free. And Carol would know, right? He says, I hope so. Um, this is the part we saw on the trailer. First, you survive what happened to you, then you survive the survival. Then, after time, if you're lucky, you get to start living again. And he's planning to sneak out later and meet them at the boat or at the lighthouse. Um, he tells her thank you for saving Roberto, and we get the kiss, right? I will say, so me and WDWA talked about this. I do prefer Ezekiel. Like if I had to choose who Carol was going to be with, I really do want it to be Ezekiel. But with that said, I did think this was a really well crafted story arc for them, and I thought this was sweet. And I don't mind Antonio. I actually really like him. I liked Carol and Ezekiel first. And I'm not convinced that it's going to be Carol and Antonio in the long run. Um, I mean, if you compare it to Daryl and Isabel, he kissed Isabel too, and she didn't stick around for very long. So we'll see. We'll see. And then I was going to say something else. All right, I don't know what it was. If it comes back to me, I guess I'll say it. But she does kiss him back. So there's definitely something between them, obviously. And then she says, I need the keys, which is another key reference, and she gets very flustered. Melissa talks about this at the end. I will say that I felt like his Hasta Luego Gringo, it felt a little bit ominous, but based on the preview for next week, it's not like this is the last time they're going to see each other. So anyway, she covers up Roberto, and then they drive away. Meanwhile, Path and Daryl are saying goodbye to the people from the community who helped them, even though it didn't really work. And they get ready to go. She says, "You weren't going to let go of her, were you?" And he says, "I thought that might have been my only chance." So, again, back to what they were talking about, because he's given up in the past, he was not going to let go of Justina. He wasn't going to give up on her. But Path basically pulled him back and made him let go so that he wouldn't die. He would have died if he'd have hung on, because the walkers would have gotten him. So it is what had to happen, but that's why she's asking. And he says, "Okay, so which way do we go?" And she just kind of smiles and says, "Okay, let's do this." Carol has stopped leaving town. They have to inspect her vehicle. It's like Jenga back there. Haven't we had a Jenga reference before? It almost seems like we have, but I can't remember where. He wants to take her solar panel. He says that it wasn't Antonio's to give, but then I think he does give it to her. I think he leaves it in the truck. But Antonio comes up to confront Fede since he's keeping her there. Can people no longer leave? When did our town become a prison? Fede says, "I like thieves as much as liars," and looks right at Carol. Another instance of someone calling Carol a liar. And then Antonio says, "Well, if we don't allow liars, maybe you should be the next to go, or better yet, why don't you tell everyone what you did with Justina?" And interestingly, everybody starts paying attention. Like, it's not that nobody believes him. Everyone's going, "Oh, what do you mean? What happened with Justina?" And Fede notices that this is unwanted attention for him. And then Antonio says, "Because Roberto is awake up there," meaning in his house, which he's lying about. Obviously, Roberto was right there, laying in the back of the truck. But he told me everything. Or maybe tell them how you tried to poison my son, all to cover your lies. I'd say murderers are worse than thieves. And of course, Fede denies it and says he's imagining things. So Antonio's really smart about this, and then he kind of dismisses Carol, which makes it seem like he doesn't care that much about her anymore. And Fede finally lets her go. So then we get the end of Antonio's very tragic backstory. Not only that he lost Maria, but all of this happens right as the turn happens. So I was like, oh, this poor guy, she's going to turn, which she does. And yeah, now we have, I think, Antonio's whole origin story, how he got burned, what happened to his wife. And like I said, it's just tragedy piled on top of tragedy, which is, par for the course for this show. So yeah, that's pretty much the end. I took a few of this is the episode Insider, and this is Norman talking about Carol's romance with Antonio. He says she's had a few. She was married to a king. She's had a couple of things, and it was interesting the way he described this as though like he's talking about from her point of view, saying, this is nice. Maybe you could settle here, which is exactly what Daryl and Beth were doing at the funeral home. So I thought it was interesting. And he says it's nice to watch her have that. They talk about the shower scene and they purposely inverted the roles so that it was not the female body that's being idolized, but the male. And they just talked about how this was a fun scene. It was a cute scene. And then it was also a contrast between Americans who tend to be weirder about that sort of thing and Europeans who have a little bit of a looser attitude. I love Zabel. I love the way that he talks about these things, and it always makes me smile, like his logic and to kind of see how he's crafting the stories. Then they talk about the different kinds of love stories. Paz believes she failed to protect her love, and so she goes on a huge adventure to rescue her with Daryl. Again, confirming everything that I've talked about here about their guilt and wanting to change that around and not give up this time. They're kind of kindred spirits. They both feel like they blew it. And this is where Isabel says Daryl still has responsibility and guilt that he didn't save Isabel. But it's interesting that they don't actually mention Isabel anywhere in the episode. This is almost a way of Isabel covering and saying, "Oh yeah, this is totally what we mean." But she's not mentioned in the episode. It's left very vague. And with her path, she failed to save Elena. This is talking about the title, which is contraband. Contraband are goods that are stolen and then delivered, so it refers to the contraband of these girls. But also, I don't think I took all of the pictures. It talks about, or maybe it's a little bit later, there's also the contraband of sneaking Roberto out. This is when they're talking about the kissing scene, and she goes, "Well, you can't really prepare for that because you don't rehearse." Which is a funny thing to say. Gentleman doesn't speak about a kiss, but they've known for months that they're coming to this moment. And he's just saying, they wanted it to work and be believable. And Zabel says, don't force things. He says, as a writer, like their number one rule is don't force things, don't rush into them, earn them. And I mean, that is actually a very good rule for writing. If you rush into something, then the audience is not going to be invested. But at the same time, this is like Walking Dead is the ultimate show that doesn't rush things. It always takes forever for them to get anywhere. And, Beth not showing up for 10 seasons. Hello. But anyway, this kind of just made me laugh that he said that. Um, Interesting when they're showing this part, he says something different right here. He doesn't say hasta luego. And I think that's just like an editing error. She's talking about how she plays Carol and how she gets flustered and doesn't know which way to go, which she does. This is kind of funny. And then they talk about the Fede Antonio Maria triangle is really a story about unrequited love on Fede's part and guilt on Antonio's part, because Fede was very much in love with Maria and he lost in the game of love to Antonio. And he's never gotten over this. So now that they've shown us what it is, they're explaining it and confirming it. He says, so of course, Fede's niece and Roberto would be an extension of this feud. And this is why they called it at the beginning a Romeo and Juliet story, because their parents were feuding. And then the children of two people who hated each other and were like mortal enemies fell in love, which is very much a Romeo and Juliet thing. And Fede is now trying to get rid of him. Oh, and he says, so there's a couple of different smuggling references there. He's talking about her smuggling Antonio out is another contraband thing. And because he lost her, Maria was with Antonio, and because she was with Antonio, she died. So there's the guilt again. He feels like it was her fault, or his fault, that she died. And the story also culminates with the arrival of the apocalypse in Barcelona. All right, guys. So that's what I have for this episode. Please feel free to send in anything you noticed that I missed. But yeah, between the dragon and figuring out Daryl's emotional arc, the fact that he feels guilty about giving up, um, that he's not going to give up this time, the parallels to finding Beth at Grady and then losing her again, finding Justina, and then she ends up going into the organization anyway. I mean, there was just so much in this episode, and I loved it, and it was great. So I will try to get a few more videos out later in the week, as usual. I hope everyone enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.